Spartacus, the gladiator who shook an empire in the heart of Capua. 73 BCE, beneath the marble columns and perfumed gardens of Rome's most prestigious gladiator school, a conspiracy was brewing that would shake the foundations of the ancient world's greatest superpower. What began as a desperate escape plan by fewer than 80 enslaved fighters would explode into a rebellion so massive, so audacious that it would expose the rotting core of Roman civilization and haunt the nightmares of emperors for generations to come. The man behind the myth, Spartacus, was no ordinary slave. This Thracian warrior captured on some forgotten battlefield and dragged in chains to Rome's flesh. Marcus possessed something that terrified his captors more than his sword skills, an unbreakable spirit and the charisma to ignite that same fire in others. Standing in the arena sand, forced to kill for the entertainment of citizens who saw him as less than human, Spartacus harbored a revolutionary secret. He was planning the impossible. The gladiator schools of Capua were fortresses of human misery, where men were transformed into killing machines for Rome's bloodthirsty entertainment industry. But here is what Roman historians didn't want you to know. These schools were also inadvertent military academies, training thousands of skilled warriors who understood Roman tactics, spoke multiple languages, and had nothing left to lose. Spartacus recognized this explosive potential where others saw only despair. The spark that lit the powder keg? The break came in 73 BCE when Spartacus and his inner circle, including the fierce Gauls Crixus and Ennomaus, seized kitchen knives and overpowered their guards. But here's the twist that Roman propaganda tried to bury. This wasn't a spontaneous riot. Intelligence suggests Spartacus had been secretly organizing for months, building networks, identifying sympathizers, and planning supply routes. This was no desperate gamble, it was a calculated military operation. Racing from Capua toward Mount Vesuvius, the rebels faced their first test. Rome dispatched Praetor Claudius Glaber with 3,000 troops, confident this rabble of slaves would be crushed within days. What happened next should have been impossible. Spartacus led his men down the unclimbable cliffs of Vesuvius using ropes woven from vines, catching the Romans completely off guard and routing them entirely. The weapons and armor seized from this victory would transform a desperate escape into the seed of something far more dangerous. The avalanche effect. Word of the impossible victory spread like wildfire through the Roman countryside. And here's where the rebellion revealed its true revolutionary nature. This wasn't just escaped gladiators. Entire slave populations, oppressed farmers, debtors, and even some free citizens began flocking to Spartacus's banner. Within months, his force had swollen from 78 desperate men to over 70,000 followers, creating what modern analysts would recognize as a complete societal uprising. But Spartacus faced an impossible dilemma that reveals his true genius. Leading a diverse coalition of Thracians, Germans, Gauls, and native Italians, each group with different languages, customs, and ultimately different goals. Some wanted revenge, others sought to return home, and many simply wanted to survive. Somehow, this former slave welded them into a fighting force that would defeat Roman legions again and again. The David versus Goliath moment as the rebellion gained momentum, Rome's initial dismissal turned to genuine alarm. This wasn't just a local disturbance, Spartacus was systematically defeating every force sent against him. Praetor Varinius arrived with 2 legions and superior equipment, expecting easy glory. Instead, Spartacus demonstrated tactical brilliance that modern military historians still study, using terrain, weather, and psychological warfare to devastating effect. The most shocking aspect wasn't just that slaves were winning battles, it was how they were winning them. Spartacus employed sophisticated intelligence networks, conducted complex pincer movements, and even used Roman prisoners as bargaining chips. These weren't the actions of a desperate rabble, but of a revolutionary leader who understood that military victories meant nothing without political strategy. The empire's growing terror by 72 BCE, Spartacus controlled vast territories across southern Italy, and Rome was experiencing something unprecedented in its history. An existential threat from within its own borders. Panic gripped the capital as reports arrived of slave uprisings spreading across the peninsula. The psychological impact was devastating. If slaves could defeat legions, what did that say about Roman superiority? What if other provinces followed suit? Here's the secret that Roman historians buried. Spartacus wasn't just fighting a military campaign. He was waging psychological warfare against the entire system of Roman slavery. Every victory sent shockwaves through slave markets from Britain to Egypt, proving that the natural order Rome claimed was anything but natural. Letters between senators from this period, discovered centuries later, revealed genuine terror that the entire imperial system might collapse. The internal fracture success, however, brought its own challenges. As Spartacus's army reached its peak of over 100,000 followers, cracks began to appear in the coalition. Crixus, his trusted lieutenant, disagreed with Spartacus's strategic decision to march north toward the Alps and escape Italy entirely. Instead, Crixus wanted to march on Rome itself, believing they could actually conquer the Eternal City. This split reveals the profound tragedy of the rebellion. Two equally valid visions of liberation that ultimately proved incompatible. Crixus represented the burning desire for vengeance to make Rome pay for centuries of brutality. Spartacus, perhaps more pragmatically, understood that true freedom lay in escape, not in replacing one oppressive system with another. When the two forces separated, Rome finally found its opening. Enter Marcus Crassus. The empire strikes back. Rome's response to the crisis revealed both its strength and its moral bankruptcy. Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the wealthiest and most ambitious men in Roman history, volunteered to crush the rebellion, not from patriotic duty, but from calculating ambition. He saw in Spartacus' destruction the path to military glory that would elevate him alongside Pompey and Caesar in Rome's power structure. Crassus brought something previous commanders had lacked: the willingness to treat this as total war. He revived the ancient punishment of decimation, executing every 10th man in units that showed cowardice. More crucially, he understood that defeating Spartacus required matching his strategic sophistication. This wouldn't be won through arrogance, but through systematic, ruthless professionalism. The final gambit cornered in southern Italy, Spartacus attempted one last desperate strategy that nearly succeeded: hiring Cilician pirates to transport his army to Sicily, where slave populations were already restless. Had this succeeded, the rebellion might have transformed into a Mediterranean-wide revolution. But the pirates, paid in advance, betrayed the rebels, a reminder that even in revolution, money talks louder than solidarity. Trapped between Crassus's legions in the sea, with Pompey's forces approaching from the north, Spartacus made a final decision that defines his legacy. Rather than surrender or flee individually, he chose to face the legions in open battle, knowing it meant certain death. This wasn't suicide, it was a final act of defiance, ensuring that Rome would remember the cost of its victories. The legacy that shook history. When Spartacus fell in battle, his body was never found among the 60,000 rebel dead, a mystery that immediately became legend. But his real legacy wasn't in death, it was in what he'd proven possible. For 3 years, an army of slaves and outcasts had not just survived, but thrived against the world's greatest military power. They de-exposed the fundamental contradiction at Rome's heart: an empire that preached virtue while depending on brutality, that claimed superiority while fearing its own oppressed masses. The 6,000 survivors crucified along the Appian Way became monuments not to Roman strength, but to Roman terror. Every cross proclaimed that Rome's power rested not on consent or natural superiority, but on violence and fear. The message was clear: this is what happens to those who dare challenge our order. Yet the very brutality of Rome's response revealed how deeply Spartacus had shaken the empire. His rebellion inspired slave revolts for centuries, from Judea to Britain. More profoundly, it planted an idea that would eventually bring down the Roman system itself: that human beings possess natural rights that no law could legitimately deny, and that unjust systems deserved resistance, not obedience. Spartacus transformed from man to myth to eternal symbol, proof that even the mightiest empires rest on foundations of clay, and that the human spirit, once awakened, can shake the world itself.